The night I came home early from my business trip and found my daughters, both under 6, alone, hungry, and crying in the dark, I made a decision I have never once regretted. Children in danger creates immediate emotional investment. Never once regretted promises a deeply satisfying outcome. The night I came home early from my business trip and found my daughters, both under 6, alone, hungry, and crying in the dark, I made a decision I have never once regretted. I want you to hold that image for a second. 2 little girls. The apartment cold. The kitchen untouched. My youngest had stopped crying. She'd gone quiet in that way that's worse than crying. The way children go quiet when they've given up expecting anyone to come. I picked her up and she grabbed my collar with both fists like she was afraid I'd disappear too. My chest felt like something had caved in behind my ribs. My wife was not there. She had been gone since the previous evening. I am a structural engineer. I was trained in Germany, the country of engineers, where precision, order, and cold logic are not just professional values, they are survival instincts. I do not panic. I do not react. I assess. So I fed my daughters, I put them to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, and I began to think with absolute clarity about what I was going to do next. She told me no one would believe me. She was probably right. A large man. A small, pretty woman. I had already tested this theory. The police had laughed. Let me give you the background, because you need to understand the architecture of this trap before you understand how I dismantled it. I met my wife in university. We were young, ambitious, and genuinely happy, or at least I was. We married shortly after graduation. I built a career that most engineers only dream about, a senior position overseeing business operations across 13 countries. We relocated abroad for a doubled salary. We had 2 daughters who were, by every measure, the best thing that had ever happened to me. Then the promotions came, and my wife changed. Not slowly, though I told myself it was slow, because accepting the truth of what was happening meant accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. She began spending money with a recklessness that made no sense. She became aggressive, then hostile, then violent. She hit me. She kicked me. Once, and I want you to understand I am a large, heavy man and she is a small woman, and I say this not to minimize what happened, but because it explains why the authorities found it amusing. She came at me with a kitchen knife. The police, when I called them, laughed. Not smiled. Laughed. She knew this. She had calculated it from the beginning. No one will believe you, she told me once, after an incident that left bruises on my arms. She said it the way someone states a weather forecast. Not cruel, just factual. Certain. I'm small and I'm cute. You are a big man. What are you going to do? She was right. I knew she was right. And somehow, that made it worse than the bruise. What I did not know yet, what I was beginning to piece together that night in the kitchen, was that the violence against me was the smallest part of what was happening in my home. When I traveled for work, which was often, she left. Not for hours. For days. She left 2 children under the age of 6 alone in an apartment while she pursued a life I was not yet fully aware of. She timed her returns precisely to be home before I landed, before I could open the front door and see the truth with my own eyes. She was clever. I will give her that. She was genuinely, tactically clever. But I had come home early, and now I was sitting at that kitchen table, and something had crystallized in me that I can only describe as the opposite of panic. It was not calm. It was colder than calm. It was the feeling of a man who has just understood exactly what the problem is, exactly what tools he has available, and exactly how much time and patience the solution requires. I am an engineer. I build things that have to hold under pressure for decades. I know how to be methodical. I know how to document. I know how to wait. I reached for my phone. I opened a new folder. I typed one word as the folder name, evidence. She had told me no one would believe me. So I was going to make it so there was nothing left to believe, only to see. What I didn't know yet was that she was about to hand me the single most important piece of evidence herself, voluntarily, cleverly, and with a smile on her face. She thought she was being smart. She had absolutely no idea what she had just agreed to put in writing. I need to tell you about the calendar app. Because this single detail, is where my wife's own cleverness became the instrument of her destruction. She had always prided herself on being smarter than me. She said it openly, casually, the way someone mentions the weather. You're good at your engineering puzzles, she told me once, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But I understand people. I understand how the world actually works. She believed this completely. And honestly, for a long time, she had evidence on her side. So when I suggested, gently, helpfully, in the voice of a tired husband trying to coordinate schedules across time zones, that we use a shared calendar app to organize our lives, she agreed immediately. Of course she did. It was practical. It was logical. It was exactly the kind of domestically responsible suggestion an oblivious, overworked engineer would make. I set up the app. I shared the link. I watched her download it onto her phone. And I said nothing. I smiled and said, "This will make things so much easier." I meant it. Within 2 weeks, the calendar was full. Business appointments, social engagements, and other things. Entries she labeled in abbreviations I wasn't supposed to understand, times and locations that didn't align with any story she had ever told me. Dates, multiple dates, coordinated with a precision that told me this was not new. This had been running parallel to our marriage for longer than I wanted to calculate. My hands were steady when I read them. I want you to know that. My hands were completely steady. I had already made my decision at that kitchen table weeks earlier. This was not a betrayal I was discovering. It was a betrayal I was now documenting. I called my lawyer. Then I called the detective he recommended. I said, "I need everything. Here is something they do not tell you about revenge. Real, methodical, legal revenge. It is not satisfying in the moment. It is work. It is cold, unglamorous, exhausting work." For months, I maintained the performance of a faithful, slightly dim husband while my lawyer and the detective built a file that grew thicker every week. I traveled for work. I came home. I had dinner. I listened to her talk. I watched her lie to my face with the practiced ease of someone who had never once been caught, and I nodded, and I passed the salt, and I thought about the folder on my encrypted drive that was now hundreds of pages long. In her voice, there were moments, I will not pretend otherwise, where I almost stopped. Not because I forgave her, because I looked at my daughters and thought, whatever happens next is going to change their lives. Am I certain enough? Am I doing this right? I was certain. I was doing it right. The break I had been waiting for came from a direction I did not expect. Her father fell ill. She needed to travel back to her home country to visit him. International flight. Several weeks away. This was, logistically, an opportunity, and I moved on it immediately. Within 2 weeks, the calendar was full. Business appointments, social engagements, and other things. Entries she labeled in abbreviations I wasn't supposed to understand, times and locations that didn't align with any story she had ever told me. Dates, multiple dates, coordinated with a precision that told me this was not new. This had been running parallel to our marriage for longer than I wanted to calculate. My hands were steady when I read them. I want you to know that. My hands were completely steady. I had already made my decision at that kitchen table weeks earlier. This was not a betrayal I was discovering. It was a betrayal I was now documenting. I called my lawyer. Then I called the detective he recommended. I said, "I need everything. Here is something they do not tell you about revenge. Real, methodical, legal revenge. It is not satisfying in the moment. It is work. It is cold, unglamorous, exhausting work." For months, I maintained the performance of a faithful, slightly dim husband while my lawyer and the detective built a file that grew thicker every week. I traveled for work. I came home. I had dinner. I listened to her talk. I watched her lie to my face with the practiced ease of someone who had never once been caught, and I nodded, and I passed the salt, and I thought about the folder on my encrypted drive that was now hundreds of pages long. In her voice, there were moments, I will not pretend otherwise, where I almost stopped. Not because I forgave her, because I looked at my daughters and thought, whatever happens next is going to change their lives. Am I certain enough? Am I doing this right? I was certain. I was doing it right. The break I had been waiting for came from a direction I did not expect. Her father fell ill. She needed to travel back to her home country to visit him. International flight. Several weeks away. This was, logistically, an opportunity, and I moved on it immediately. Feel like, whether there would be satisfaction, or sadness, or something messier than either. It felt like the moment a structural calculation confirms the building will hold. Clean. Exact. Right. She looked up from the documents and across the table at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw something in her expression I had never seen before. She was afraid. "We can make this go away," my lawyer said quietly. "All of it. Every charge. but you will need to agree to our terms. She straightened in her chair, lifted her chin. The old reflex. I'm small and I'm cute, and I always win. What terms? My lawyer slid a single sheet of paper across the table. She read it once. Then again. Her face did a thing I don't have words for. The terms were not a negotiation. They were a surrender document. And she was about to discover that the signature she put on that sheet of paper was going to follow her for the rest of her life, in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. What happened when she signed, and what happened after? She signed that. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because after everything, the months of documentation, the sleepless nights, the performance of a marriage that had already died, it happened in less than 4 seconds. She picked up the pen. She read the terms one final time, and she signed. My lawyer gathered the papers without expression. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The terms were as follows. I receive full custody of both daughters. She owes me nothing, and I owe her nothing. No alimony, no financial support of any kind, a clean financial severance. She is permitted supervised contact with the children only, no unsupervised visits, no overnight stays, no holidays abroad. And in exchange, every charge we had filed, child abuse, neglect, endangerment, domestic violence, would be dropped. She walked out of that room believing she had survived. I let her believe that. For the moment, I let her believe that. What she had not fully processed, what her cleverness had somehow failed to calculate, was the second document she had signed. The custody transfer to my parents, executed weeks earlier, was already registered. The divorce settlement built on top of it. And because she was not a European citizen, had never obtained citizenship despite more than a decade of residence, what she had just signed also triggered the automatic review of her residency status in both the country we had lived in and in Germany. She had assumed that a long-term marriage to a German citizen was sufficient protection. It was not. The marriage was over, the terms were on record, and the immigration authorities are not sentimental institutions. I moved back to Germany with my daughters. My parents had kept them stable, kept them in routine, kept them loved. My youngest had started calling my mother Oma, with a comfort that made my throat tighten the first time I heard it. My older daughter, the one who had always been more watchful, more serious. She pulled me aside on my second night back and asked, in the careful voice of a child who has learned to measure her words, "Is Mama coming back?" I told her the truth in the only way a father can tell a 6-year-old the truth. You are safe. You are home. And I am not going anywhere. She nodded, once, and went back to her dinner. She has her mother's precision and her father's silence. She is going to be extraordinary. I will never tell them what their mother did. Not the details. Not the calendar. Not the photographs. Not any of it. They will form their own understanding of her when they are old enough, and I will not be the instrument of that understanding. This was my revenge. It was never theirs to carry. My ex-wife, meanwhile, discovered what she had signed, the full consequences of it, over the following 18 months in installments. The residency review went as the lawyers had anticipated. She was granted a temporary extension to find employment and reapply for permanent status. She was, by every external measure, intelligent and capable. She had always found it easy to charm people, to perform competence, to present herself exactly as situations required. What she had never developed, because she had never needed to, was the ability to actually work alongside people over time, to be accountable to someone other than herself, to exist in a system that didn't bend around her personality. She was let go from her first position within 3 months. The second lasted 6 weeks. The third didn't make it to 8 weeks. Each termination was documented, each was legitimate, and each one was another data point in the immigration authorities' file. Eventually, the welfare support that had been bridging the gaps was canceled. The residence review reached its conclusion. She was permitted to remain in one EU country, not Germany, not the country we had built our life in, under conditions that required her to demonstrate financial self-sufficiency. She was also, by the terms of our divorce, required to pay child support. I found out about the rest the way I found out about most things during this period, methodically and by accident. A colleague mentioned something. I searched. The search confirmed it. She had registered, legally, formally, with her real name, her real photograph, her real phone number, as a working escort. The registration is public record in that country. The reviews were visible. She had a 4.7-star rating. I closed the browser. I sat for a long time that I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had spent years imagining a version of justice that felt like triumph. This felt like nothing. It felt like reading a weather report about a city I used to live in. I do not feel guilt about the outcome. I want to be precise about that. Every consequence she is living with is a direct result of choices she made. Choices she made freely, repeatedly, and with the full confidence that she would never face them. The children are safe. They are flourishing. My older daughter won a mathematics award at her school last spring and gave a small speech that made my parents cry. My younger one has decided she wants to be a veterinarian and currently has strong opinions about every dog she encounters. I rebuilt my career in Germany. It cost me professionally, moving back, the disruption, the years of distraction, but I am an engineer. I rebuild things. That is what I do. There is one thing left. Her uncle, the man at the origin of everything, the man whose cruelty set the entire sequence of events in motion, is elderly. He will not live forever. When he dies, I have made myself one promise. I will go back. I will stand at his grave. And I will have the final, disrespectful word. Not for me. For my mother, who had no one to stand for her. That is all.